The sensation of return came earlier than she saw actually the ranch. 30 miles to the nearest town, the gravel road mixed dust with the red-hot air, and from under the open windows of the pickup rose the tart aroma of dry grasses and hot tar. Mia Bryant switched off the radio, got tired of the hissing of the country channel, and simply listened. Dragonflies knocked against the panes, grasshoppers beat against the wings of the mirrors. Through the windshield pulsed the bluish haze of the Bighorn ridges, and the heart tapped out the familiar rhythm, home, home, home. She grew up here each summer, endless pens, the lazy mooing of cattle, a night sky so dark that the stars seemed slits in the lid of the world. The family said that it would be a quiet weekend, just to visit Uncle Jack, to celebrate his 60th. No dramas. No city news. Mia smiled. Quiet always meant a quest. The ranch absorbed stories. As old wood tobacco smoke, it was enough only to touch, and the smell of mystery rose itself. When the gate with the scratched inscription Briar Hollow Ranch opened, the sun already bent to the west, flooding the pasture with thick amber. Uncle came out to meet, tall, with the same unruly cowlick as her late mother had, only the hair now was silvery, like a horse tail. He raised a hand in greeting, but the smile came out nervous, as though it caught on an unseen splinter. "You have grown," he said, when they embraced. "Considering that I am 24, to hope is late," Mia snorted. He did not laugh. His glance slid to her boots, old Ariat, covered with road dust, then somewhere behind her shoulder. "Before supper I will show you the new one," Uncle muttered. "Appeared a month ago. Peculiar." Peculiar in the language of the Briar Hollow cowboys meant can knock the soul out of a rider. Mia slammed the pickup door, and felt how curiosity quivered under the pit of the stomach. The stables stretched the letter P, and each board kept the trace of hooves, like postal stamps of memories. In the building number 3 it smelled of hay dried under the bridge's sun, and of something else metallic, cold, as though the air before a thunderstorm. Horses conversed with neighing, but in the far section stood a dull silence. Uncle took a lantern from the hook. "Here." When they approached, Mia understood that the rest of the herd literally moved aside. Neighboring mares stood to the door with their rumps, fanning tails, as though they did not wish even to see the new lodger. Into the last stall, plunged into half-shadow, fused a patch of the deepest black. From it emerged a pair of eyes, not alarm white, but oily dark, like a night without moon. "Shadow," Uncle introduced in a tired voice. "The workers call him." "I would call it beautiful," Mia whispered. The lantern's light ran along the horse's withers, not a single dent from harness, not a scratch. Only muscles, tight under skin, like bridge cables. Shadow made half a step forward, and Mia caught a slight smell, wood smoke with an admixture of wet earthy. Unusual, alien. "Do not come close," Uncle warned. "He does not like people." The change of owners knocked his head. The words hung in the air, but the silence itself refuted them. The stallion did not shy away, on the contrary, stretched his muzzle to the holes in the partition. Mia felt a spontaneous impulse to stretch out a hand. She acted almost instinctively, as in childhood, when behind each stall hid a new friendliness. She touched the velvet skin above the nostril. At that instant something clicked. Not a sound, a sensation. As though the stable went deep into a well, and around remained only this point of contact. Shadow froze. Mia caught herself not breathing, the whole body expected either a flash of rage, or an electric strike. Neither one, nor the other. Only a light, barely perceptible trembling, as though under her palm stirred a tired motor. "See," she turned to Uncle, in a whisper, so as not to frighten her own bravery. "He is not, that is today," he interrupted. "Tomorrow can be otherwise." Mia wished to object, but in the depth of the stall suddenly two sparks flashed, eyes reflecting the lantern, and cold truly squeezed her shoulder blades. The glance was not equine. In it read rather a test, almost a question, will you manage? After supper, stewed beans and corn bread, she went up into the old guest bedroom. A patchwork quilt, a ceiling fan, cobweb lace in the corner, everything seemed not to change for decades. Mia opened the window, letting in the creaky smell of time. Night over the ranch sprawled in viscous indigo. Hardly had she extinguished the lamp when from below came a quiet clank, as though someone touched the gate chain. Then hooves clicked. Not a trot, not a gallop, a single measured step, and silence again. She froze, listening. Inside the chest something responded with a sullen echo, a painfully familiar childish feeling, an exciting fear before the unknown, which pulls stronger than pushes away. He found me first, flashed in the head. Outside a weak moonglow flared, and for a moment Mia saw a silhouette, tall, integral, as though cut out of inky paper. The horse stood 10 paces from the house, gaze directed straight at her window. Did not move, only a thick mane swayed from the night wind. Mia drew the curtain, not from fear, but to muffle the tremor in her own hands. The heart beat hollowly, however under the skin a tight foreboding unfolded, it was an invitation. She returned to the bed, but did not lie down. She sat on the edge of the mattress, bare soles touched cold floorboards, and thought, if in the morning he will again be waiting, I will come once more. Already not as a girl, but as a person whose name he, it seems, pronounced with the whisper of hooves. Outside the grasshoppers suddenly fell silent, as though someone pulled out the sound. In that ringing pause Mia distinguished a weak, distant, quite human, voice, do you hear? Return what was taken. She inhaled moist night air smelled of ash and thunderstorm. Ahead still were 3 days of vacation. Ahead, shadow. And ahead a story, which long asked to finish. The best in the village, the sharp honesty of morning. The first ray of sun over the bighorn offshoots struck the room so bright that Mia woke in a single moment, as though someone ripped a film of sleep from her eyes. The heart beat in time with the horse breathing. She slept not more than 3 hours and still saw a dream, the same barn, but charred walls trembled, as though were still hot. Stepping to the window, she caught in the air a smell, which cannot be confused, moist ash. The yard was empty, but on the dusty gravel right under the frame remained a chipped horseshoe. It had not been there at night. Mia squatted, led a finger along the darkened metal, fresh, slightly warm, as though forged from a memory. Return what was taken, the voice still rang inside, not letting relax. She hid the horseshoe in the side pocket of ripped jeans. Later she would ask uncle, whence it could appear, if not a single working horse had unshod. In the kitchen it smelled of corn porridge and fried eggs, but the coziness swayed, like a cardboard scenery. Uncle Jack stood at the stove, flipping bacon with mechanical accuracy. The dark blue mug in his hand trembled barely noticeably, coffee splashed at the edges, leaving brown strokes on the enameled sink. Heard, at night again steps were, he threw, as though to no one specific. Not beasts, Mia specified, sitting down. A horse. Shadow. And as though a voice. Do you know who Eliza is? Uncle's hands froze. The sizzling of bacon muffled a second pause. Old stories are better not to wake, he pronounced finally and gave her a plate. Eat, already cooled. The plate trembled in her hands. She put the fork. Uncle, I found yesterday a locked cupboard and a diary there. It was about a fire, which is in no family chronicle. Why? He wiped palms on the apron, sat opposite. Because not everything is fit for tales. The voice broke. Leave it. But his eyes darted toward the window, to the stables, and in them flashed the same as in the shadow at night, a mix of fear and guilt, brewed into one thick glance. Deciding waiting useless, Mia went to the shed alone. The road was accompanied by a morning wind, shaking dusty curtains above the pasture. Bird clamor in the crowns broke off when she approached Building 3, as though Echo was afraid to look inside. Shadow stood at the door, breathing evenly. On the straw before the stall lay another horseshoe, the pair to the one she picked up in the morning. A rough semicircle of metal, as if formed a half of a closed circle. "Are you going to leave me traces?" Mia muttered, recalling children's quests where riddles folded piece by piece. She took from the pocket the night-found horseshoe and laid nearby. The two halves folded into an almost perfect oval. Shadow quietly snorted, touching one horseshoe with lips, and, for the first time, allowed her to enter inside the store without a hostile toss of the head. Mia bent, checking the forged nails. On his hooves everything was whole. Means, the horseshoes not his own. Or, worse, they were removed from a horse which no longer walks. After dinner she secluded herself in the abandoned workshop, where once Grandad sharpened gears for pumps. On the table she spread Eliza's diary, 2 horseshoes riddles, an old plot map, pulled from a bureau. The records of the girl 60s were chaotic, but every second page began with a drawing of a spiral symbol. Mia overlaid the horseshoes on the map. The circle covered the northeastern corner of the pasture, there, where an old reservoir is marked and a dirt path to a dried creek. Fluffed a grey accordion of guesses. If the horseshoes are markers, and Shadow is a guide, means, the reservoir is the place where hidden what? Evidence? Someone's mistake. The phone in the pocket vibrated, flashed with white noise, then the screen bloomed a single frame, a black and white photo of the horse yard, flame on the edges, in the center, the figure of a girl with loose hair, and near the same stallion. The screen went out. Mia exhaled through tightly clenched teeth. Good, I understood. The blade goes closer to the bone. To sunset remained 2 hours, when she harnessed a little quad, old Ranger, threw there a lantern, a flask with water and the map. Uncle called from the porch, but she only waved. I will return for supper. The road to the reservoir grew with weeds. Twice the wheels jumped in pits, but Mia did not slow the pace. Fear answered not with a knot, but a straight line of adrenaline, calling to the finale. On the approach to the concrete bowl she saw him. Shadow already waited, without bridle, without saddle. How he came first, a riddle. Manet swayed in the evening wind, and eyes reflected the western sun with honey sparks. The reservoir was empty, cracked concrete, steep walls, at the bottom, colonies of dry mosses. In one sector yawned a breach, like a shagreen wound. There the horse directed, as soon as Mia got off the quad. Inside smelled of dampness, as though rain lingered only here. The tunnel went into the womb of the hill, the walls glistened wet. Shadow stopped, not making a step inside. Mia understood, further, for her alone. The flashlight outlined a narrow corridor, steps led down. Each step creaked, like an old pen on paper. The whisper returned, now distinct, not he brought the fire. The fire came for him. Mia's heart pounded rhythm with spots of light in the eyes. Below the corridor opened into an underground room. In the corners, charred beams, remains of boards and a third horseshoe, soldered to the floor with a spike nail. Nearby a metal plate, blackened from soot, Eliza. Mia squatted, touched, the metal was icy. Return, Echo whispered, but already from inside the head. She pulled 2 horseshoes from the backpack, folded 3 into a ring. In that second the flashlight blinked, the walls lit with a scarlet glare, as though lines of former flame came alive on the stones. The heavy air sighed and quieted. The blinking stopped. The room plunged into even, almost kind darkness. On the bottom of the ring from 3 horseshoes lay silvery ash, drawing a spiral. Outside sounded a quiet neigh. Shadow called. Mia rose, the heart moved already calmer, fear, like a squeezed lemon, left in the mouth a bitter clarity. When she came out again to the reservoir, sunset melted with crimson metal. Shadow stood at the edge, calmly waiting. Along his back slid warm light, turning black coat into liquid obsidian. Mia walked to him, put her palm on the forehead. Eliza, she pronounced, and the name fell into the evening with a quiet bell. I returned. The wind tore a lone sparrow feather, rolled across the concrete bowl, like a small white sign of agreement. The whisper disappeared. Instead the evening air rang with cicadas, the world returned itself a voice. Shadow lowered his head for the first time, his ears relaxed, and he heavily exhaled right into her palm, that same spicy breath, in which mixed wormwood, dust and a little of coming thunderstorm. Back to the ranch Mia rode already astride, the bridle still was not, but she no longer tried to guide. The horse chose a path softly, as though anew tried on the world to the size of their common calm. Somewhere inside still remained charred little pieces of questions, but the heart knew, exactly from such coals light is born, if to give it a place to burn, and not to hide under a wet ashy lid. Shadows on the ground stretched, folding into letters, which not to read with accustomed eyes. And among these shadows Mia suddenly found herself smiling, for real, wide, as then, when the world seemed an endless field of new stories. Ahead remained 4 chapters. But the most important already happened, the past finally spoke, and she decided to listen. 1. Dawn, which forgives nothing, the best in the village, the sharp honesty of morning. The first ray of sun over the bighorn offshoots struck the room so bright that Mia woke in one instant, as though someone tore the film of sleep from her eyes. The heart beat in time with the horse breathing. She had slept not more than 3 hours and still saw a dream, the same barn, but the charred walls trembled, as though were still hot. Stepping to the window, she caught in the air a smell which cannot be mistaken, moist ash. The yard was empty, but on the dusty gravel right under the frame remained a chipped horseshoe. It had not been there at night. Mia squatted, ran a finger along the darkened metal, fresh, slightly warm, as though forged from a memory. Return what was taken, the voice still rang inside, not letting relax. She hid the horseshoe in the side pocket of torn jeans. Later she would ask Uncle, whence it could have appeared, if not one working horse had become unshod. 2. Breakfast with the bitter aftertaste of silence in the kitchen. It smelled of corn porridge and fried eggs, but the coziness rocked, like a cardboard decoration. Uncle Jack stood at the stove, turning bacon with mechanical accuracy. The dark blue mug in his hand trembled scarcely noticeably, coffee splashed at the edges, leaving brown strokes on the enameled sink. Heard, in the night again steps were, he threw, as though to nobody specifically. Not beasts, clarified Mia, sitting down. A horse. Shadow. And as though a voice. Do you know who Eliza is? Uncle's hands froze. The sizzling of bacon muffled a second pause. Old stories, it is better not to wake, he pronounced at last and handed her a plate. Eat, already cooled. The plate quivered in her hands. She put the fork down. Uncle, yesterday I found a closed cupboard and a diary there. It was about a fire which is in no family chronicle. Why? He wiped the palms on the apron, sat opposite. Because not everything is fit for stories. The voice broke. Leave it. But his eyes darted toward the window, to the stables, and in them flickered the same that in the night shadow, a mixture of fear and guilt, cooked into one thick look. 3. Morning in stall 12. Deciding waiting useless, Mia went to the shed alone. The road was accompanied by a morning wind, shaking dusty veils above the pasture. Bird hubbub in the crowns broke off when she approached Building 3, as though Echo was afraid to look inside. Shadow stood at the door, breathing evenly. On the straw before the stall lay another horseshoe, the pair to that which she picked up in the morning. A rough semicircle of metal seemed to form half of a closed circle. Are you going to leave me traces? Mia muttered, remembering children's quests where riddles were assembled bit by bit. She took the night-found horseshoe from her pocket and laid it nearby. Two halves formed an almost perfect oval. Shadow quietly snorted, touching one horseshoe with his lips, and, for the first time, allowed her to enter inside the store without a hostile fling of the head. MIA bent, checking the forged nails. On his hooves everything was whole. That means the horseshoe's not his own. Or, worse, they are removed from a horse that no longer walks. 4. Invisible map. After lunch she secluded herself in the abandoned workshop, where once Grandad sharpened gears for pumps. On the table she spread Eliza's diary, 2 horseshoes riddles, an old plot map, pulled from a chest of drawers. The notes of the girl of the 60s were chaotic, but every second page began with a drawing of a spiral symbol. MIA laid the horseshoes on the map. The circle overlapped the northeastern corner of the pasture, there where an old reservoir is marked, and a dirt path to a dried-up creek. A grey accordion of guesses fluffed. If the horseshoes are markers, and Shadow is the guide, then the reservoir is the place where is hidden what? Proof? Someone's mistake. The phone in the pocket vibrated, flashed with white noise, then the screen bloomed with a single frame, a black and white photo of the horse yard, flame at the edges, in the center, a figure of a girl with loose hair, and near the same stallion. The screen went dark. MIA exhaled through tightly clenched teeth. All right, I understood. The blade goes closer to the bone. 5. Along the trail of straw dust 2 hours remained till sunset, when she harnessed the little quad, Old Ranger, threw there a lantern, a flask with water and the map. Uncle called from the porch, but she only waved, "I'll be back for supper." The road to the reservoir had sprouted weeds twice the wheels jumped in pits, but MIA did not slow her pace. Fear answered not with a knot, but a straight line of adrenaline calling to the finale. On approaching the concrete bowl she saw him. Shadow already was waiting, without bridle, without saddle. How he came first, a puzzle. Manet shook in the evening wind, and eyes reflected the western sun with honey sparks. The reservoir was empty, cracked concrete, steep walls, at the bottom, colonies of dry mosses. In one sector gaped a break, like a shagreen wound. There the horse went, as soon as MIA got off the quad. 6. Voice under the concrete crust inside it smelled of dampness, as though rain lingered only here. A tunnel went into the womb of the hill, the walls wetly glittered. Shadow stopped, not making a step inward. MIA understood. Father, for her alone. The flashlight drew out a narrow corridor, steps led downward. Each step creaked, like an old pen on paper. The whisper returned, now intelligible, not he brought the fire. The fire came for him. Mia's heart pounded the rhythm with spots of light in her eyes. Below the corridor opened into an underground room. In the corners, charred beams, remains of boards and a third horseshoe, nailed to the floor with a spike nail. Nearby a metal plate, blackened by soot, Eliza. MIA crouched, touched, the metal was icy. Return, whispered the echo, but already from inside the head. She took 2 horseshoes from the rucksack, laid the 3 in a ring. In that second the flashlight blinked, the walls lit with a crimson glint, as though lines of former flame came alive on the stones. The heavy air sighed and calmed. The blinking stopped. The room plunged into an even, almost kind darkness. On the bottom of the ring of 3 horseshoes lay silvery ash, tracing a spiral. Outside was heard a quiet neigh. Shadow called. MIA rose, the heart moved already calmer, fear, like a squeezed lemon, left in the mouth a bitter clarity. 7. Sky without a tongue. When she again came out to the reservoir, sunset melted with crimson metal. Shadow stood at the edge, calmly waiting. Along his back slid warm light, turning the black coat into liquid obsidian. MIA walked to him, laid a palm on his forehead. Eliza, she pronounced, and the name fell into the evening with a quiet bell. I returned. The wind tore a lonely sparrow feather, rolled it across the concrete bowl, like a small white sign of consent. The whisper disappeared. Instead, the evening air rang with cicadas. The world returned to itself, a voice. Shadow lowered his head for the first time, his ears relaxed, and he heavily breathed out right into her palm, that same spicy breath, in which wormwood, dust and a little of coming thunderstorm mixed. Back to the ranch Mia rode already astride, the bridle still was not, but she no longer tried to guide. The horse chose a path softly, as though anew fitting the world to the size of their common calm. Somewhere inside still remained charred pieces of questions, but the heart knew, exactly from such coals light is born if to give it a place to burn, not hiding under a wet ashy lid. Shadows on the ground stretched, folding into letters that are not to read with habitual eyes. And among those shadows Mia suddenly found herself smiling, truly, broadly, as then when the world seemed an endless field of new stories. Ahead remained 4 chapters. But the most important already happened, the past at last spoke, and she decided to listen. The night, which earlier frightened, this time brought a dream without fire. Mia woke under the chirrup of swallows and not at once understood, where the dream ends, where the morning begins. The body still remembered the jerks of the quad, Shadow's rough hide and the quiet, almost gentle sigh of the underground room. When she rose, on the windowsill already waited Uncle's teapot, the smell of sage and honey enveloped, as though the ranch apologized for all the unspoken. But on the table lay a new object, a thin silver chain with an empty mount for a pendant. The note beside said only 2 lines, each knot has its closure. Wear it until you feel the circle has closed. There was no signature. The card's corners smelled of the same smoke as yesterday's reservoir. Mia let the chain slip through her fingers, the metal seemed warm, as though already lived her temperature. The empty mount clicked in the heart with a familiar emptiness, readiness for a new symbol. Daytime the ranch lived an ordinary bustle, heifers lowed at waterholes, tourists' children photographed themselves against the red barns. And still Mia felt a crack in the scenery, like a thin squeak in a perfectly tuned guitar. She found Uncle Jack near the tractor shed. He was laying boards along a wall, but one shoulder held higher than the other, as though something pulled him down. "Did you leave the chain?" she asked without preludes. Jack dropped a board, swore vexedly. "It is not a toy, Mia. There are things better to leave where they lie." "Ignoring is not the same as letting go," she answered quietly. "Then tell me," he lifted his eyes. "What did you do yesterday? Why does the reservoir again smell of rain, though 2 weeks of drought?" He spoke almost a whisper, but anger glowed in the eyes, like alcohol in a bonfire. Mia understood, he feels that control slips away. Not over the ranch, over his own past. And her discovery pulled to him a hole into which all carefully kept order can fall. She did not defend herself. "I returned the horseshoes." Eliza's energy calmed. "Shadow is not a threat, he is a witness. But this is not yet the end." Jack closed his eyes when he opened, tired agreement floated in them. "There is still one place," he said after a long breath. "Old tunnel under the water tower. There lies what they did not let bury." The water tower stood on a distant, overgrown knoll. The path to it had long disappeared under broken sage. Jack pointed to a concrete hatch at the base and handed Mia a lantern. "One time I already tried to enter. I heard as though someone groans under the earth. I turned back and walled the hatch with stones. If it groans, means still alive," she whispered and descended first. The smell was complex, rusty water, wet earth, a light admixture of ozone, as though under the tower electricity accumulated. The tunnel walls were covered by the same spirals as in the corridor of the reservoir, but these were partially smeared with concrete. A trace of hurried repair. At the 30th step the lantern's stuttering light snatched out a niche. There, neatly folded, lay things: a child's skipping rope, a charred volume of Little Women, and a third pair of horseshoes, but already full 4 pieces, composing a complete circle tied with wire. Mia crouched. The chain on her chest stirred itself and stretched toward the circle of horseshoes. The heart beat out a new formula: completion equals to connect, but not to lock. She removed the chain, laid it inside the circle. The wire by itself snapped, as though waited for this. The horseshoes fell apart into separate elements, the chain lay like a snake, and in its empty mount, suddenly, flared a little fiery bead. It burned not painfully, but softly, like lamp flame. Mia lifted the ornament. Inside froze a tiny amber stone, a bracelet for an empty cage. A sigh of wind swept through the tunnel. The silence afterwards was different, not heavy, but clarified, like air after a storm. When they came to the surface, clouds gathered to the north. Along the horizon rang a thunderstorm, and the ranch, as though feeling discharge, came alive with loud sounds. Dogs barked, chickens flapped wings. Shadow grazed by the fence, muzzle in grass, but, seeing Mia, lifted his head and neighed, lingeringly, calmly, as though greeted. Jack drew back the plane of shoulders, as if dropped tonnage. Eliza always said, "There are no evil horses, there are unspoken words." I counted it naivety. Now I see, it was her password. He took his niece by the hand. "It's time for me to stop hiding behind silence. Are you ready to hear everything?" Mia looked at the amber in the pendant, where the spark lingered, awaiting an answer. "Ready," she said. And added, nodding toward Shadow, "But first, you'll give me occasion to lead him to the summit. There even the tightest knots listen best." Jack smiled faintly for the first time in many days. "Go. I'll wait here." "We both will wait." The wind grew heavier. The breeze carried the smell of forthcoming rain and fresh freedom. Mia stepped to the horse, not to tame, but to share the path. Because this story already is written by the strength of 3 voices: the past, which ceased to be silent; the present, which dared to listen; and the animal, which can show the road when people shut their eyes. Ahead, 3 chapters. A thunderstorm that rises above the plain, and a dawn in which the ranch again will become a home, not a map with dark spots. But for that it will be necessary to resolve the last: what is more important, to keep habitual order, or to risk becoming guardians of truth, where each horseshoe has its own echo, and each shadow its own light? The rain came suddenly, as though someone chopped a ceiling of the sky. By 4 in the afternoon the far ridge was covered by a coal curtain, flashes of lightning tore the horizon, and the ranch quieted. Cows huddled under a shed, dogs lay belly to ground, and the people themselves spoke in whispers, as though thunder could eavesdrop. Mia kept a palm on Shadow's withers. Warmth undercoat responded with tremor, but it was not alarm, but impatience, as if the horse felt, the storm is not a disaster, but an invitation. On the horse's neck hung Eliza's pendant. On Mia's chest, the chain with the amber, now pulsating slightly brighter than in the morning. It seemed the 2 stones measured heartbeats. Jack, wrapped tight in a wax slicker, pointed to the break of the ridge that locals called the Silver Tooth. A wall of rocks went into clouds, crowned by a ramshackle fence of the old pasture. "If thunder somewhere tears knots, then there," he said. "I won't go after you, this chapter is yours." Under the heavy sky even the ribbon grasses seemed steel. Mia leapt into the saddle. Shadow, hardly sensing her weight, shook his menore and went into the visor of the storm, not at a walk, but with a measured warrior's gait on review. The rise turned out steeper than it looked from below. Soil slipped, prickly branches lashed at boots, but Shadow did not stumble once, as though he saw the road even in the flashing dark of lightning. Mia pressed her breast to his back, counting heartbeats: 1, thunder; 2, the glint of amber; 3, the creak of the old fence slightly higher. When they climbed onto the flat plateau, the first lightning struck quite nearby, highlighting the broken contour of a shepherd's stone circle. Here once they set corrals, now only borders of charred stakes, crooked, as if tried to run yet froze in glass of light writing. The chain on Mia's breast heated, as though absorbing electric discharges. She dismounted and stepped inside the half-ruined circle. Air became dense, like water at the bottom of a lake. The sounds of the storm quieted instead, a hum, resembling a low O with which steel bridges sing in wind. Shadow remained outside, yet did not tear, watched, as though needs only her consent to enter. In the center of the circle lay an artesian stone, glossy, like bitumen after rain. Above it, in a hovering haze, shimmered something akin to a reflection of flame, though no fire was. Mia felt in her mouth the taste of iron, the familiar smell of the underground tunnel. She stretched out her hand, the amber in the pendant flashed, and cast a short jet of light straight into the smoky flame. Thunder clapped above, and the reflection of the charred barn, that very one from dreams, flickered for a moment upon the stone. Then she understood, the storm is not punishment, it is a spotlight. It will highlight what hides behind the soot of time. Mia touched the stone. Inside the palm, as if turned a key. The shadow of the girl, Eliza, emerged nearby, not like a ghost, but like a negative on a photoplate, flickering in lightning's light. The voice broke off in a whisper, but not frightening, you carry two half-circles. One, fear, the other, mercy. Lock them with lightning, and you will hear the last truth. Mia swallowed fear, and for the first time felt that it does not cut, but pushes forward, like a gust of wind into a sail. She removed the chain, took out the pendant, amber blazed like coals of a fire. Removed also the amulet of the shadow, an ashen quartz, cold at the horse's neck. She laid them on the stone, two orange eyes, one hot, the other calm. Shadow, she called softly. The horse stepped over the border of stakes. When his hoof touched the stone, the second lightning struck. The flash deafened, but did not burn, the discharge passed through amber and quartz, welding them into a single crystal. The wooden stakes around flared with strips of blue fire, yet at once went out, not touching the wood. Mia sank to her knees, the crystal now glowed with steady honey radiance. She felt how every heartbeat echoes with it, and behind her shoulders spreads a feeling, neither euphoria nor horror, but thick fullness, like saturated air before dawn. Eliza no longer stood nearby, instead a light aroma of wet lilac, the smell of a summer evening that had not been in the mountains for many years. Shadow bent and touched the new stone, with his muzzle his breath mixed with the rain, and the earth's hum stilled. Mia rose, blood rang in fingertips. She realized, the circle has closed, and the opened wound of the past no longer seeks an exit through whisper and fire. Now memory will become a story, not a prison. The storm receded, not reaching the ranch. Patches of blue clouds tore and floated to the plain. Shadow stepped lightly, unhurriedly, as though all his former nervousness had weathered with the storm. At the very edge of the pastures they were met by Jack. He held the slicker at his throat, but rain had already stopped. "Is it done?" he asked quietly. Mia opened her palm. In it lay the new double crystal, amber grown through with a quartz vein. Deep inside twirled a spark, a tiny silhouette of a running horse. "The circle is not closed," she explained. "It is a bridge. Between those who hear and those whom they fear." Jack looked long, then stretched his hand, but did not take the stone, only touched it, as though greeted. "Your father would be proud of you," he said at last. And, smiling pale, and Eliza, too. Late in the evening, when the wind rubbed dried mud on the steps and the distant coyotes hoarsely gathered a pack, Mia sat on the porch. Shadow grazed near the water trough, calmly fanning himself with his tail. In his eyes the house lights reflected, and there no longer flickered weariness, only tired peace. Mia pressed the crystal to the empty cell of the chain. The metal clicked, accepting a new form. The chain sparkled silver, each link now seemed to reflect a faint flash of lightning. She closed her eyes. Instead of the habitual whisper, silence. But in that silence she fancied a distant rumble of hoofbeats, not menacing, but even, like the heart of the earth under grass. Not an echo of fear, an echo of strength that no longer needs hiding. After the storm the ranch seemed reborn. From windbreakers and ropes the last water dripped, boards dried, from cracks came spicy smells of heated resin. But the main thing was the silence, it no longer pressed, but spread with a roomy wing. Into that silence at last fitted human voices. MIA arranged on the kitchen table photographs of Eliza, the diary, the molten amulet, and the newborn crystal. Jack, pushing glasses to his forehead, in turn touched each item, as though checking a pulse. Daniel stood at the wall, hands in pockets, shoulders tense. He feared to say a wrong word and spill the fragile piece. If we want, said MIA, that this place breathe without scars, we'll have to stop being silent. Not only about the shadow. About everything. Uncle lowered his eyes. Eliza died because of our fears, because we decided that the frightening is easier to hide than to understand, he whispered. I then was a kid. To save meant to forget. MIA took his palm and covered it with the crystal. Inside, the little light trembled, a quiet agreement. In the evening in the sitting room, the old tube radio hummed. First time in many years it caught a clear wave of the local channel. The announcer, whose manner usually grated, now sounded surprisingly soft. In Birch Creek County they cancel the long-running Scrawny Horse auction. A new owner has been found, ready to leave the herd on free pastures. Daniel raised his head. Is that about the Texans? They wanted to ship 100 head. They won't ship, Jack answered calmly. They needed Shadow as the main lot. Now they understood they don't own him. The radio crackled. The host switched to the weather forecast. Unusually long anticyclone, cicadas will buzz until September itself. MIA caught in that report a sign. The storm had done its work. Now the land required that people take the word. At night she did not sleep. With a lantern she walked to stall 17B, where Shadow rested, standing on 3 legs. The horse did not flinch at her step. MIA opened the door, and, instead of entering, knelt right in the doorway. You asked what I will do when fear disappears, she whispered. I thought, I'd leave, to seek new secrets. But, maybe, the secret is to stay and speak. Shadow quietly drew in air, warm breath touched her hair. In answer from the depth of his chest came a sound, not neighing, not a sigh, low, like a distant rumble of thunder, yet purring. Suddenly MIA felt something tighten in the belly, not horror, but a heavy understanding. To reign memory is easier than to reign guilt for silence. She will have to meet neighbors, those who consider the ranch cursed, and tell, the curse was the lie, not the land. In the morning MIA unwound the wire at the mailbox. During the night she wrote 3 letters, to an old vet friend, that at the ranch hands are needed, to the county secretary, with a request to place under protection the strip of forest where by unofficial data a historical object is discovered, and to herself, a short one. How many stories will become truth when you stop being ashamed to tell them? The letters flew off with the first delivery truck. The heart beat an empty drum, the words went outside, which means a chain reaction will start. By day Logan found her at the water point. In his hands was an old rope bridle, the very one that once belonged to Mia's father. Take it, he offered. I was mending tools and realized, everything I called care was fear of losing one more close person on a horse. Forgive that so many years I mixed care and control. MIA ran fingers over the soft, cracked leather. Hold it together with me, she said. It is your memory too. Logan smirked crookedly, yet did not remove his hand. In that moment between them burst the last thin seam of mistrust, like a thread restraining an overheated engine. Toward evening she led Shadow beyond the west paddock, there where long they hadn't mown. Tall grass crumbled silver of seeds, the warmth of August dusk hovered at ground level. Without saddle, barefoot, she lay breast on the withers. "Show me a road without stones," she asked in a whisper. And he went, unhurriedly, rolling a wide step among grasses. The world around became simpler, warm breath, creak of grasshoppers, thick clouds on a pinkish sky. Suddenly Mia caught that she does not hold on to the manere, and does not fall. Fear, it appears, had not gone, it guarded balance, but now sat quietly, like a calm dog at a campfire. So they walked until the first star cut the firmament. And when they stopped, the earth under Mia's feet no longer shook. The tremor had moved into each grass blade, into the cicada wings, into the far coyote bark, a living vibrato of a big yet friendly world. At the ranch lights long since had gone out, but sleep, like an uninvited guest, did not come. Mia sat on the veranda rail, before her stretched a stripe of meadow, and farther, merged into darkness, the forest where once hid Eliza's story. The moon lingered behind a cumulus cloud, and the world seemed cut from charcoal paper. The silence she had grown accustomed to suddenly pulsed, the whole body caught the sound of hooves. Shadow came out of the night by himself, without tether, as though decided it was time. He stopped opposite, tossed his head slightly, "Let's ride." In Mia's chest flared the old spark of fear, but beside it blossomed a larger feeling, curiosity, in which now there was no terror, only zest. She stepped down, laid a palm on the hot horse forehead, and stepped with bare soles into the dew. Without saddle, without bridle, like yesterday, but today the path was not to the glade and not to the shaft. Shadow chose a direction that even the wind did not know, along the dried creek, through a hollow where the earth shivered under hooves, and further, eastward, where slopes rose with steps, like ancient terraces. Each sway of his neck vibrated in Mia's spine, and she wondered how easy it had become to read the language of muscles. When the slope went sharply up, she felt that heights she feared no more than depths. Fear long since ceased to be a predator, it turned a lantern, marks the cliff, yet does not demand to turn back. On the very crest the wind suddenly stilled, and a panorama opened. The ranch glowed with distant dots of lights, and among hills, like an incandescent coal vein, blazed a thin streak, the linehouse of an old abandoned railway tunnel. Shadow slowed the step, pricking ears. Exactly there, to the tunnel, he was leading. The entrance was overgrown with blackberry sleepers had rotted. Shadow did not want to go inside, an ear twitched, breathing became shallow. Mia felt on the neck the familiar stab of cold, the place is alive, and it remembers. She dismounted, spread the branches with arms. Inside smelled of damp slate and old rust, and also, of something resinous, similar to the smell from the cave of the knot, only softer. The phone light cut the darkness uselessly. Mia switched it off, and let the eyes adapt. Then exactly in the depth flashed an amber spark, not bright, but steady, quivering, like the heart light from the crystal. And together with it a sound came, booming, like a roll of thunder in an underground pipe, yet warm, without threat. You carried out the cry of the earth into the air. Now let the earth hear your voice. These were not words by ear, but a sense that lay right into the chest. Mia stepped. Shadow remained at the entrance, kept watch. The railway arch led into an unexpectedly wide chamber that once served as a turning loop. In the center stood an old signal column of black iron. Light of amber emanated from cracks on its top. Eliza's diary spoke of something locked underground, and Mia understood. This place lived earlier than the stables, earlier than the railroad itself. The hum intensified, the floor vibrated. She took out both protective stones, the amber one, in which warmth glimmered, and the marbled with a silver vein, where a quiet cool pulsed. The sound coming from the column matched the beats of her heart. A choice: hide the stones back, let memory fall asleep, or put them into the fissure, and cut the chain forever. Fear tried one last time to push, and if the fire breaks out again. Mia answered aloud, Fire heals the earth if you know to listen when it dies. She inserted the stones into the crack. Inside the column hissed, as though air caught by a snake burst to freedom. Amber light soared and crumbled into 1,000 sparks to the ceiling, as if the night sky suddenly decided to shine from below. The sound faded, the chamber became an ordinary damp stone emptiness. When Mia came out, the sky in the east was graying. Shadow still kept the entrance. He approached, bumped his forehead to her shoulder and dissipated. Not died, not vanished, as though the thinnest soot left the material imprint, leaving in the air the aroma of wet fur. On the ground remained only a horseshoe, old, iron had dimmed, yet on the edge flashed a fresh amber tint. Mia picked up the horseshoe, and the heart did not sink, on the contrary, it expanded. The shadow no longer is needed as a guide, the work is done. By dawn she returned on foot, led by a light eastern wind. Uncle stood at the porch with a mug of coffee. Without a single word he opened the pasture gates. Horses, one by one, sedately went to the morning dewy grass. Not one shied, fear left with the shadow. Daniel, pulling out a hose for the drinking trough, raised his eyes, saw the horseshoe in Mia's hand, touched the brim of his hat. So the story is finished. Finished, she smiled, so that the next may begin. Daniel nodded, and in that nod was more trust than in any words. 3 days later the ranch gathered neighbors. They announced a holiday, such as had not been since the cowboy rodeo shows. Instead of a horse auction they arranged the liberation of the herd, the huge gates of the pasture flung wide, offering the animals a new expanse. When the last mare with a dancing jog went into the field, the sky in the distance cracked with a quiet, bass thunder. It did not foretell a storm. It was a roll akin to that underground sound, not threat, but reminder that the earth speaks if you don't gag it. Mia stood beside Logan and Uncle. In her hands she held the horseshoe, now polished and hung on a thin leather lace. When the thunder subsided, she raised the horseshoe high above her head, and the sun refracted a bright strip of amber gold. "It is not a talisman for luck," she said loudly, so that all could hear. "It is memory, fear knows to be a horse. It carries you where you yourself fear to step. But if you listen, it will bring not to doom, but to truth." Someone in the crowd exhaled. A murmur of applause rose, first meager, then stormy, like a river spilling. Late in the evening Mia went out alone to the forest edge. Somewhere far off, in the very black corner of the sky, a lightning flickered again, pale, soundless. And for a second it seemed to her that a horse figure, dark, yet no longer frightening, came out of the thicket and dissolved in the high grass. She smiled, "Thank you, guide. Now the road I shall find myself." With these words she turned toward the house, where friends' voices buzzed, lanterns hissed and baked apples smelled. Thunder behind her no longer was a rack of fear. It sounded a low chord of a big song, in which just now a new chorus was born. And if at night the wind brings to you a quiet whisper of horse hooves, do not be afraid. It is simply the earth reminding, the darkest secrets become roads. It is enough only to learn to hear their steps.